Welcome to Podcast 83, a regular look at the news, stories, and trends related to Michigan's 83 counties from the Michigan Association of Counties.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Podcast 83, the podcast put on by the Michigan Association of Counties. We're joined by our normal crew this afternoon, Deena Bosworth, Director of Government Affairs, and then Government Affairs Associates, Madeline, Fata, and Samantha Gibson. As we're moving into the last, what we expect to be the last couple weeks of the legislative session for 2023, wanted to give everyone an update on some bills we've been tracking and make sure everyone understands where we're at. Before we move on, we are recording this on Monday. We do have Lions playing Monday Night Football tonight. I'm sure everyone's excited about that.
Not as excited as you.
No, it'll be a great experience. I'm getting to go to the game, so that should be a fun time. First NFL football game I've ever been to. Been to a bunch of college football games, but first time I've been to an NFL football game, so that'll be fun.
It won't be fun. Make sure you tell Campbell I said hi. Can you do that?
Well, I doubt I'll be there. Probably be up in the nosebleeds, but
no,
maybe
you're not a very good wingman, Steve.
Maybe I can wave and make a lot of noise.
All right.
All right, so kick us off here, Deena. Obviously, a package of bills we've been watching, we've kind of been part of in an ancillary position on these clean energy bills. Some of the bills passed, some of them haven't. Kind of give us an update on where that package stands, please.
Absolutely. Steve, I'm gonna kick it over to Madeline because she's been doing the deep dive into the clean energy stuff for us. I mean, I can kind of talk, big picture, but she really knows the ins and outs and nitty gritty. So Madeline.
Right. Yeah. So the clean energy package and the solar siting bills we've been talking about are kind of linked. I don't think publicly linked, but they certainly are tied to one another. The clean energy package passed the Senate last week. So those bills will require all electric providers to be at 50% renewable energy by 2030. 100% clean energy by 2040. So that means carbon free by 2040. So those bills finally passed the Senate along party lines. It was a very long session day. I think there was a lot of closed door negotiating. I don't think everyone was fully on board with it. The utilities oppose it. It's a big deal. It's going to change a lot of things here in the state.
I think some of the environmental groups opposed it too, didn't they?
The Environmental Justice Coalition ultimately urged Senate Democrats to vote no on it and said it's not a climate win. So it's very contentious.
Yeah, that was a little bit more about, I think it was Kent County and their ability to, burn trash and create energy out of it, right?
There's a really big landfill waste facility over in Kent County. And I think initially they were left out of the legislation, but through negotiations, they were looped back in. And I do think that upset some of the environmental groups. Right. But ultimately they got through the Senate, they got through that first chamber. I don't know if they'll be up for a House vote this week or next week. I would expect them to be, but who knows if the votes are there in the House. They struggled to get them in the Senate.
Yeah, and because they had the same bills in the House, essentially, correct? That they ended up not moving in the House, right?
Yes.
So did those bills ever move out of committee in the House?
No.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So they ended up, looks like, changing gears, moving to the Senate, moving those bills after some hearings in the House. So yeah, that might shine some light on where the House might be on that package.
Yeah, well, I think it was, big burden on clean energy package, get that out of the Senate. And then if the utilities, and I'm stealing Madeline's thunder here, but if the utilities have to reach those renewable energy goals by those dates, then the House was in charge of streamlining the siting for those renewable facilities. So we've been hyper engaged on the solar and wind siting piece of the legislation in the House. And the Senate was, primarily focused on those clean energy goals. But as it stands now, Madeline, you want to talk a little bit about, we don't know on the siting bill at this point, right?
Right. Yeah. They got the package out of the House Energy Committee with all the Republicans voting no, all but one Democrat voting yes, one Democrat passed on her vote out of committee. So that says a lot, even right there with those 14 members, 15 members. They need 56 votes in the House. And if every single Republican's a no, and if you've got even 2 or 3 Dems on the fence, it's not going to move.
Well, and let's talk a little bit about timing too. So we still are expecting an adjournment or sine die the 8th or 9th?
9th,
9th, so they'd have session on the 9th.
probably,
So if
unless
you
they
do-
go super late on the 8th, and then
Yeah, so
take it
but if you
into
walk that
overnight.
back 5 days, right, to get, if we're looking at the citing bills that are first chamber bills, 5 days from the 9th, you got 1, 2, 3, they would have to get them out by this Thursday out of the
Mhm.
Senate, right?
Yep.
The citing this Thursday, out of the House.
Or sorry, out of the House, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, quick timeline, I mean, they've had some hearings on it, obviously, it's not a new set of bills, but you start walking those timelines and things get real tight.
And you know what I don't understand though, is why can't they take their time on this and do it in the spring? I mean, they really can. Let's get the policy right. They don't need to shove this out. Even if they want to achieve their clean energy goals and get that to the governor to have her sign those bills, being careful on the citing is important. I mean, we've, put so much time into trying to preserve some level of local control about this solar and wind siting that we hope they slow roll that a little bit. Get the clean energy package to the governor, fine. Give us some time to work out the details on the siting piece of it.
Yeah, I mean,
That wouldn't upset me. I'd
no, of
be
course,
happy about
right,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
obviously, being proponents of community control, a new term I learned last week with some of my counterparts that they've been using instead of local control, community partners, things like that, being good partners as counties are to the state. I would support that too. I think that makes sense. So moving along, Sam, you want to give us a little update on the J&J bills that we've been talking about past few weeks?
Yes, the juvenile justice package has swapped chambers, so some of the House bills are on the Senate floor and vice versa. At this point, we're just waiting for both chambers to vote the bills out and send them to the governor's desk. They do have delayed effective dates of October 1 of 2024. So if they don't get these packages to the governor before next Thursday, the 9th, not the end of the world, but it was a large goal of theirs. So I would be surprised if they don't achieve that.
That's good. So that's a good update there. Hopefully those will keep moving along and not get caught up in negotiating all these other issues that are going on in the legislature the next few weeks. So thanks for that. Deena, also some good news, PPT. You want to tell us a little bit about the PPT bills that we've talked about?
Yeah, PPT, the bills are done, signed by the governor. So those are the bills that would reimburse locals for their losses associated with that small business tax exemption expansion that they did back in 2021. I know that's, a great big long way of saying there was an increase benefit to small, or not necessarily small businesses, but businesses with up to $180,000 worth of equipment. They don't have to pay taxes on that anymore. The bills that we were really working on were means to reimburse local governments for those new tax exemption losses. So those are signed by the governor and really quite happy about it.
About 75 million statewide for locals,
About
correct?
75 million statewide. Yep. Money's already been set aside. Money has to go into the fund every year to make sure that we're reimbursed fully. So that's great. Now, with legislation that's complicated, I won't be surprised if we have to revisit it for some tweaks in the next couple of years, but really quite happy that they finally got that implementing legislation done.
Yeah, that's great. That's some good news there. Back to you, Sam, on some bills that just recently got some traction that we heard about having to do with governmental immunity and statute of limitations and all sorts of things related back to the NASA issue at MSU. Those bills have come back up again for some discussion. Can you give us an update there?
Yes, so House Bill, let me pull the bill number up, 4486, was introduced earlier this year had some testimony in House Criminal Justice. Like you mentioned, Steve, the package is kind of a post-Nassar piece of legislation. And this bill in particular would remove governmental immunity. So if a county employee, for example, had committed an act of criminal sexual conduct, and the bill as introduced reads, and the county knew or should have known, the county would have been held liable. Now, these bills are up for a vote in House Criminal Justice tomorrow morning, and the bill sponsor has amended, or I should say, Representative Brixey, who's the lead sponsor on the package. She doesn't sponsor this bill in particular, but she's offered up an amendment that removes local units of government and government as a whole from this legislation. So we would retain our government immunity on this issue. And with that amendment, we would go from opposed to this legislation to no position moving forward, because it'll no longer impact us.
And you said that's up for a vote tomorrow in committee? Is that when we're expecting?
Yes, Tuesday, the 31st.
Okay. Good. So we'll be watching that, of course, and making sure that that amendment is adopted to make sure that counties aren't held liable for should have known something. Obviously, there's a lot of ambiguity with that. How do you determine that? And I think that was our big concern with that package, was those sort of definitions that are vague like that. Deena, you want to talk a little bit about the bills having to do with the assessor designation? Something that we dealt with last session or 2 sessions ago when that was initially passed. I can't even remember now.
Even longer than that, I think. So what we're talking about is legislation that was worked on, and I want to say it was almost 3 sessions ago. And this legislation dealt with, how do you handle those local units of government who have, messed up tax rolls, who are not necessarily doing assessing the right way, or their tax rolls are not prepared correctly. So we work with the Department of Treasury and the Senate to come up with some checks and balances on that. Because I know our equalization directors rely on accurate reporting and assessing from the local level. The Department of Treasury relies on it. And really any unit of local government that receives tax revenue, they find it extremely important to make sure those tax rolls are absolutely correct and done the right way. And because there were so many units of local government doing the assessing that were not doing it correctly and had a problem with their rolls, the legislature voted on and enacted legislation that would require a county to designate an assessor of record. So basically that assessor would go out and really take over the tax rolls. After a while, we'll go over and take over the tax rolls for those local units that really couldn't get it right. Unfortunately, because tax work is so complicated, it's been challenging for many of our smaller counties and some of our rural areas to find qualified assessors to fill that role. And so what this legislation does, I'm talking about House Bill 4979, sponsored by Jen Hill, would allow the state tax commission to appoint those assessors of record. So that designated assessor could be appointed by the STC and take that burden off of the county. The STC is going to have much more access to assessors that will be qualified than necessarily each individual county would. So this legislation would allow a county to just say, hey, state tax commission, you take it over, which is great news for those that need it. So the legislation passed the House this week. MAG supports it. Passed the House. Now it goes to the Senate for consideration. Whether or not they get that done before the end of the year, I'm not sure, but it passed, with 85 yes votes and only 24 no votes. So I expect to still get a significant amount of support when it goes over to the Senate.
So when you say the STC would make that appointment, that would be at the request of a local unit of government or a county?
The county could say, I can't do it. I'm not doing it anymore. State tax commission, you find somebody to help.
Okay. Oh, great. Provide support in those areas, like you said, that need it. So that's a great option for locals to have. Finally, and I'll leave this up to Madeline or Deena to update, or both you guys, something we've been tracking, but it hasn't had any movement, and just want to give an update to everyone. The septic bills, the package of septic bills, something we've heard a lot about. I hear a lot about when I'm going around the doing updates in places. I know you folks have heard a lot about it in committee, talked about it in our committee. So can you guys just give us a brief update on as we kind of end this legislative session, where we think those bills are, where they are now, and where we might think they end up?
Yeah, the update right now is there really is no update. The bills were dropped, I think, at the end of spring. And then we had a work group. And then it's been kind of all quiet since draft 2 came out of the work groups. But either way, the legislation still says that every 5 years, every septic tank in Michigan would need to be inspected. If a county has a point of sale ordinance in place, it would be null and void. We've been talking a lot, though, with the local public health association. We've been talking, SEMCOG has gotten really involved, and they're issuing a study on kind of what some other Midwestern states are doing. So we do have a couple work groups coming up in November with those groups. But as far as legislative movement, I heard not until after the first of the year. Come January, we'll kind of revisit everything. But we're going to continue to work out the kinks, hopefully, through this fall.
Yeah, something we expect to come back up. We're opposed as we are now, and we'll see what gets changed, reintroduced, new introduced after the new year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Deena, any update?
No, I just one more thing to add on that, and sort of like our process. We have our platforms that tell us, really the direction we need to go on each individual piece of legislation. But because these bills are pages and pages long and they're very fluid, they change, they're amended all the time. I just, kind of want to reiterate that we've got to stay on our toes, and we know exactly what we're opposed to, and we'll continue to oppose those provisions. But if it turns out to be nothing, we might, have to backtrack a little bit. So
Okay.
but we have our direction from our members.
Yep. All right. Anything else from anyone? All right. Well, great. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Podcast 83.